Last Sunday, we celebrated the Epiphany, which marks the story of the wise men bringing gifts to the infant Jesus. This brought to a close the entire story surrounding the birth of Jesus. Tomorrow, we'll celebrate the baptism of Jesus, which inaugurated his public ministry as an adult. But what happened in between? There is only one story in the Gospels that tells us anything about Jesus' life between his birth and the beginning of his ministry. So that's what we'll talk about today, the boy Jesus. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Saturday, January 10th, 2026. I'm just fascinated by the fact that the four Gospels begin so very differently. Not one of them begins in remotely the same way as any of the others. Most of the material in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is recognizably similar, if not virtually identical, but they are very different in how they begin to tell the story of Jesus. Mark, in fact, includes absolutely nothing before Jesus' baptism. Nothing about his birth, not a word about Joseph, his father, barely a mention of his mother Mary, no shepherds, no wise men, no manger. Mark's gospel begins with the appearance of John the Baptist in the wilderness, baptizing and preaching a gospel of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And John's account of the incarnation is not a story, but a theology. Again, nothing about his birth. That leaves us with Matthew and Luke for all of our information about Jesus' life prior to his baptism and the beginning of his ministry. And in this portion of the two Gospels, they tell completely different stories. Not contradictory stories necessarily, but just different ones. As I hope you know, for example, only Luke tells us the story of the shepherds in the field keeping watch over their flock by night, and only Matthew tells us the story of the wise men. But both Gospels tell us other stories about things that happen around the birth of Jesus, but they share none of these stories in common. There is only one story that takes place between the birth of Jesus and his baptism, and that's the one that has my attention for today. It appears in the Gospel of Luke and is a story about Jesus at the age of 12, the only story in the canonical Gospels about Jesus as a youngster. It's a bit lengthy and deserves a full telling, so let me simply tell it here. Now, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor. I mentioned a couple of times that this is the only story of the boy Jesus that appears in the canonical Gospels. As you may know, there were other Gospels out there that floated around the early church, but which did not make the cut for inclusion in the Bible for a variety of reasons. No need to delve into that question here. All I want to note is that there were other stories of Jesus that appeared in other writings, but they all tell inflated stories of miracles and healings, all in an apparent effort to establish Jesus' divine bona fides even as a child. Note that in this story from Luke, there isn't anything miraculous going on. Remarkable, but not miraculous. Jesus and his family make the trip from Nazareth to Jerusalem for Passover, as would have been their custom. As a 12-year-old, Jesus would probably have had his bar mitzvah already, making him an adult member of the community of faith, much like our children who go through confirmation, usually in middle school. The most important word in this story, though, is obedient. The story ends with the remark that after this incident, Jesus was obedient to his parents. But it is clear that he has also been obedient to his Jewish faith in attending to the study of Torah with the teachers in the temple, as well as probably in his home synagogue, obedient to attending to the Passover ritual. In short, obedient to God. It's not a story to establish his divinity. It is a human story to establish his obedience and his fidelity to his faith, a theme that Luke will come back to again and again throughout this gospel. And that's one of the most important things to remember about Jesus, his complete and perfect obedience to the Father. Now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.